1900s, having been used for the first time, years after, in the Contesta do War, 1912 to 1916, occurred in southern Brazil. One of the weapons with the greatest military power at the time, it was used in the 1932 revolution by federal troops and also by the Constitutionalists.
Before starting, I ask you to like this video, subscribe, and at the end, share this video with your friends. Let's go!
Discovered by Portuguese navigators in the year 1500, Brazil since its origin was a colony whose main function was to provide natural resources for the Portuguese crown. For more than 3 centuries, Brazil faced numerous riots and separatist movements, many of them motivated by high taxes, abuses of power by the authorities, mistreatment of slaves, and the predatory exploitation of gold and diamonds, which were sent to Europe for pay the Portuguese external debt. Among all the revolts that took place until the end of the Brazilian Empire in the end of 19th century, one stood out, the Farroupilha Revolution, also called the Farrapos War. The conflict, which took place between 1835 and 1845. Your main objective was to separate the provinces of Rio Grande do Sul and Santa Catarina from the rest of the country, forming 2 independent states, Piratini Republic and Julian Republic. One of the leaders of this separatist movement was the Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Garibaldi, who, condemned to death after a failed coup attempt in Italy, Garibaldi fled to Brazil and later allied himself with gaucho farmers who fought against imperial troops. However, in the 20th century, only one civil conflict had great prominence in Brazil, the Paulista Revolution, or Constitutionalist Revolution of 1932. Also named as Paulista War, it was the first major uprising against the administration of the dictator Getúlio Vargas, and also the last major armed conflict in Brazil. Started in São Paulo, the richest and most developed state in Brazil, this war was led by the São Paulo elites, who wanted to recover the political control lost with the revolution of 1930. That revolution of 1930 put Getúlio Vargas, born in Rio Grande do Sul, in the presidency of the republic with the help of a military coup. With that, the old system known as the Old Republic, where rich landowners from São Paulo and Minas Gerais took turns in the presidency of the country, came to an end and changed the political scene in Brazil. Initially, although they had lost their political hegemony, the Paulistas supported Getúlio Vargas with the hope that he would call parliamentary elections for a new constituent assembly. However, time passed and nothing happened. Paulistas were upset that Vargas had removed state governors and appointed some of his personal friends as interventors. In this way, the São Paulo landowners began a strong opposition to the Vargas government. In addition, there was also a large participation of university students, merchants, and other professionals, such as industrialists, doctors, and lawyers, who demanded new elections. Thus, on May 23, a political act took place in the center of the São Paulo city. The police repressed a group of demonstrators and caused the death of 4 students. Their names were Martins, Miragaia, Drauzio, and Camargo. The fact revolted São Paulo society, and the initials of the young people, MMDC, became one of the symbols of the separatist movement, which in the following months promoted protests and popular motivation in front of the public buildings of the federal government. The armed conflict began on the 9th of July and was led by the state interventor, an equivalent to that of governor, named Pedro de Toledo. The people from São Paulo carried out a huge campaign using newspapers and radio stations, managing to mobilize a large part of the population. On the São Paulo side, it is estimated that there were more than 200,000 volunteers, of which only 30,000 were able to fight due to lack of weapons. In addition to them, just over 25,000 military personnel and members of the Paulista public force joined the separatist movement. On the other hand, while São Paulo gained popular support, 100,000 soldiers from the Vargas government left to face the separatists in São Paulo, and another 200,000 soldiers fought small uprisings in other parts of the country. Paulistas expected the support from Minas Gerais and Rio Grande do Sul. However, both states didn't directly join the conflict. The war was almost restricted to São Paulo, as the support signaled by the Rio Grande do Sul didn't occur, and the opposition to Getúlio Vargas in other states didn't have the strength to create pockets of rebellion. In Rio Grande do Sul, there were some battles but they were quickly defeated. In Minas Gerais, the fighters achieved the capture of a city for 3 days, only this. In Pará state, there was a small revolt against the Brazilian army which was quickly smashed. The greatest support for the Paulistas came from Mato Grosso. The south of the state was the scene of struggled fighting, and the Brazilian army deployed thousands of soldiers there. In Rio de Janeiro, there were some student demonstrations that were harshly repressed by the police. Months before the conflict, Getulio Vargas had purchased armaments and planes from France and the USA on an urgent basis, whose delivery forecast was for the month of August. However, despite having already received payment, France refused to send the arms and ammunition for humanitarian reasons. The USA, on the other hand, claimed problems in boarding the planes by sea and didn't comply with the agreement. In a short time, São Paulo, which was planning a quick offensive against the capital, found itself surrounded by federal troops. Thus, they appealed to the population to donate gold in order to buy weapons and feed the troops. Women's philanthropic societies promoted events such as the Gold Campaign, whose objective was to raise money and items of value to help in the war effort. Stamps, treasury bonds, and commemorative coins were also created, the values of which were reverted to the purchase of inputs for combatants, such as uniforms, weapons, ammunition, food, petrol, and first aid items. Foreigners living in São Paulo also collaborated in local war efforts. The German community donated modern ambulances to separatist troops, while Italian businessmen donated money and some of them lent their factories for the manufacture of weapons and ammunition. The Syrian colony made thousands of uniforms for free. As previously mentioned, most of the weapons used by the Constitutionalists in the conflict were manufactured in São Paulo factories owned by Italians, which were adapted for this purpose, under the command of the engineer Roberto Simonson. Among the factories that were adapted were Pirelli, Rodia, Nada Figueiredo, Antarctica Paulista Brewery and Industrias Matarazzo. Before the Revolution of 1932 began, war production in São Paulo was reduced to 25,000 cartridges and 25,000 hand grenades per day. The conflict provoked an intense industrial concentration in the region of São Bernardo do Campo, which raised the daily numbers to 220,000 cartridges and 220,000 grenades. Professionals from the Polytechnic School, Institute of Technological Research and the Institute of Engineering collaborated with the development of weapons projects even without mastering these techniques. In the end, São Paulo developed mortars, bombs, shotguns, and even a flamethrower. In addition to these new self-made weapons, the Paulistas took advantage of some Brazilian army's weapons that, before the revolution, were in installations located in the state of São Paulo, mainly from the 4th Infantry Regiment. Among these, the most important weapon was the Krupp 75mm cannon. This important military equipment began to be produced in Germany at the end of the 19th century. It arrived in Brazil in the 1900s, having been used for the first time, years after, in the Contesta do War, 1912 to 1916, occurred in southern Brazil. One of the weapons with the greatest military power at the time, it was used in the 1932 revolution by federal troops and also by the Constitutionalists, but the latter with a reduced quantity of this piece of artillery and its ammunition. This war was responsible for the highest number of casualties in the troops from São Paulo. This crop of this video belongs to the Brazilian army. It has a mechanical firing system similar to those used in 1932, with only its traction system having been modernized. On July 23, after receiving information that his greatest invention, the self-propelled plane, was being used in Brazilian lands to injure people, the inventor Alberto Santos Dumont ended his own life. However, the authorities only reported the fact after the end of the conflict. The indecision in the advance of the troops and in the guerrilla strategy, in addition to the lack of support from other states and the closing of the ports of São Paulo by the Navy, sealed the military fate of the revolution at the end of the first month of war. Defeat would only be a matter of time. In total, there were 87 days of fighting, from July 9 to October 4, with the last confrontations taking place 2 days after the surrender of São Paulo. On October 2, in the city of Cruzeiro, São Paulo troops surrendered to the leader of the federal offensive, and the following day, October 3, they signed the surrender. The surrender of the Constitutionalists was considered a betrayal. The civilian government blamed the Paulista public force for having signed the peace under humiliating conditions. The fight for the Constitution was strengthened and, in 1933, parliamentary elections were held, placing the civilian Armando Salles as governor of the São Paulo state, in 1935. Also, in 1934, the Constituent Assembly was organized that would make the new Magna Carta of the country, enacted in the same year. This would be the shortest of the constitutions that Brazil has ever had, because it was suspended with the new Getulio coup, which instituted the new state order, in 1937. An official number of 934 deaths was recorded, although unofficial figures report up to 2,200 deaths. With the end of the conflict, São Paulo returned to the role that Brazil had before Portugal during the colonial period, a mere slave.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, give it a like and support this channel. Sign up and mark the bell to receive the notifications from new videos.